Hello and welcome to Meet the Press Reports, where we take a breath and dive in on one big topic. First of all, congratulations. If you're watching this, that means you too have made it to the other side of the 2020 presidential campaign. It was not easy. Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. That seems clear to almost everyone, hint, hint, except the president, his top aides, at least in public, and some of his staunchest Republican allies and supporters. And in a campaign chock full of shattered norms, President Trump has shattered yet another. There has been no concession speech, and chances are quite good there won't be one. There probably won't even be a concession phone call. And that would be a shame, because politically speaking, the concession speech is central to who we are as a country and who we aspire to be. It's what makes us different. It's an opportunity to begin to heal those deep wounds of battle. It's a clarion call to warring factions that we are, in fact, still Americans first. A once every 4 years reminder that what we have in common is far greater than what divides us. There's no law requiring a candidate to give a concession speech, but it's so ingrained in our politics, there might as well be. And doing it artfully, that can be a victory all its own. Concession speeches have become a staple of American democracy, dating back to 1896, when William Jennings Bryan sent the first known concession telegram to William McKinley. Over the years, they have morphed from private, polite courtesies to public displays of peaceful transition of power. The first televised presidential concession speech was in 1952.
It is traditionally American to fight hard before an election. It is equally traditional to close ranks as soon as the people have spoken.
Since then, every losing major party nominee has delivered some sort of televised remarks.
We didn't win, but we made history, and that fight has just begun.
America must always come first, so we will get behind this new president and wish him well.
I so wish that I had been able to fulfill your hopes to lead the country in a different direction, but the nation chose another leader.
Some have done it early on election night, before some polls even closed.
I promised you 4 years ago that I would never lie to you, so I can't stand here tonight and say it doesn't hurt.
In close races, they happened the day after Election Day.
I would not give up this fight if there was a chance that we would prevail.
This loss hurts, but please never stop believing that fighting for what's right is worth it.
Or even over a month later, after the 2000 Florida recount.
Let there be no doubt. While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it.
The speeches usually preach unity.
We've got a president-elect. He's going to have my help.
He will be our president, and we'll work with him.
Whatever our differences, we are fellow Americans. And please believe me when I say, no association has ever meant more to me than that.
With occasional comedy.
Tomorrow will be the first time in my life I don't have anything to do.
Gerald Ford, suffering from laryngitis, had his wife give most of the speech on his behalf.
The president asked me to tell you that he telephoned President-elect Carter a short time ago and congratulated him on his victory.
The speeches are not limited to general elections.
The work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die.
And can even be used to set up a losing candidate's political future.
I am as inspired, I'm as hopeful as I have ever been in my life.
Or to attack one's perceived enemies.
You don't have Nixon to kick around anymore.
Although not required by any law, the speeches represent the end of a campaign.
We now bring it to an end tonight.
And often, a career.
As for what I'll do next, I don't know the answer to that one yet.
I plan to get very active in the grandchild business.
I have been blessed, as only a few people ever have, to help shape the destiny of this nation.
Joining me now is presidential historian Michael Beschloss. So, Michael, we learned in our piece there that, and viewers learned that it was the first concession telegram by William Jennings Bryan. We had the first radio concession from Al Smith. Wendell Willkie did it People saw it on a newsreel. If they went to the movies, they saw the Wendell Willkie concession. Tell us about concession speeches before it became sort of the thing to do, really beginning with the 20th century.
Well, in the old days, you know, Americans didn't expect concession speeches because they didn't have radios or TV, and maybe they would read in the newspaper that there was a gracious message from the loser to the winner. But Chuck, just as you said, this is very much a feature of modern times, and it's a matter of closure. You know, we watch the election returns to come in, watch them come in, and we don't think the whole thing is over unless there is a loser who says, I concede to the winner, winner claims victory, everyone's on the same side. One of the most poignant concession speeches I think I ever have heard, I didn't hear it at the time, was too young, but 1960, Richard Nixon said, one of the great features of democracy, we have hard-fought campaigns. Once a decision is made, we unite behind the man who was elected. He was talking about John Kennedy. Very bitter defeat for him, yet he was saying what is really the American ethos.
What's interesting, and you're hinting at this, is that the harder fought the election, the more eloquent the concession, the bigger the landslide, the less eloquent the concession at times. I'm thinking Goldwater and McGovern.
Right, because, you know, when it's a close election, you have someone who expected that they could win. You know, you were showing that image of Hubert Humphrey in 1968. Until the last moment, he thought that he had pulled even and ahead of Richard Nixon at the very end after being 20 points behind at some point in that campaign. So it was all the harder for him to hear the words that Nixon had won.
So, given how polarized we are, and given that it seems as if it's a strategic decision by this current makeup of the Republican Party to collectively not yet publicly concede for fear of demoralizing supporters in the face of a couple of Senate runoffs, the more polarized we are, should we expect more and more campaigns to end without concessions?
No. What I hope is the case, Chuck, is that 2020 is an exception, that you've got a candidate, Donald Trump, who has no manners, who knows that there is no way that he's going to become president, but he's sitting in the White House as if he's going to turn blue. You know, I've got two sons, as you know, who played baseball in Little League, and at the end of a Little League game, every time they lost, they'd shake hands with the winner, and they'd say, good game. That's what we do in America. This is very un-American. You know, he can go to the rest of his life claiming that the 2020 election was stolen from him. I hope that every other loser in the future will show manners that are a little bit more in the American tradition.
Well, and it brings me to what I think is the single most important concession speech in modern American history, and that's Al Gore's in December of 2000. And we could, some might argue, but I guess imagine had Al Gore chosen the Donald Trump path of not conceding, what would have that meant? What would that have meant?
You know, I thought that so many times, Chuck. You know, what if Al Gore had greeted that Supreme Court decision that the voting in Florida, your home state, would stop by saying, I don't believe in the court decision, which he did say he disagreed with it. But then going on to say, I want every one of the millions of people who supported me, Al Gore, for president to go out in the streets and demonstrate or, you know, besiege county courts or something like that. There could have been a very difficult time in this country. Instead, what Gore said, and this is verbatim, he said, for the sake of our democracy, I offer my concession. Gore cared more about democracy than himself. I wish we saw the same thing nowadays.
Stephen Douglas loses to Abraham Lincoln, doesn't concede once, but you told our producers toured the South to concede.
Yes, exactly right. You know, there were Southern candidates who lost, and the South reacted to Abraham Lincoln's election by beginning to secede, and the Civil War began. Stephen Douglas, who was the other Northern candidate from Illinois, he was one who said perhaps we could find some kind of compromise to avoid a civil war. He lost the election. He didn't go home and sulk. Instead, he attended Abraham Lincoln's inauguration proudly. Lincoln got up to speak in front of the Capitol. He took off his stovepipe hat, and he didn't have any place to put it. And Douglas, with great graciousness and knowing what the symbol would mean, reached over, took Lincoln's hat, and put it on his lap while he listened to Lincoln give his inaugural address.
Well, if you really believe in America first, there's one way to prove it. Michael Beschloss, our historian here at NBC News, really appreciate you getting us started on this deep dive into the importance of the concession speech. Thank you, sir. So, what makes a good concession speech? Why is it so important? And what is it like behind the scenes as candidates accept the reality of defeat? We spoke to speechwriters who were in the room with Al Gore, John McCain, Mitt Romney, and Hillary Clinton about the art of losing gracefully.
No one wants to write a concession speech, and no one wants to deliver one.
The concession speech, in a lot of ways, is the beginning of that peaceful transition of power.
It's like fighters shaking hands after a match.
It's important to make a gesture towards unity.
The concession is really a way of putting a cap on an election. It's a way of punctuating this experience.
I think it's important to be gracious, no matter who it is, and to unify the country.
It's an opportunity to speak to a broad national audience that maybe will hear you in a different way than they would have heard you in the heat of the campaign.
It legitimizes the president-elect, and it tries to heal over, I think, some of the divisions between the two competing camps.
Senator McCain was a very superstitious fellow, so he didn't let me start writing those things until we had something close to solid evidence of a win or a defeat.
We had started writing the concession speech the week before the election, and we provided it to a staff member that we knew was going to be with Governor Romney and Mrs. Romney and their family in the suite on election night, getting the election returns.
We actually didn't talk about it before the recount began. I had a draft that I carried in my pocket for weeks of a concession speech, and I had numerous drafts during the recount, not knowing if we would need them.
It was very much a give and take, and it was like she gave us direction, and said, these are the points I want to make, and we wrote a draft and came back, and she said, okay, I would like to do more of this and less of that, and I would like, let's try it this way.
In 2012, with Mitt Romney, he never used our draft. He just really had a sense of what it was he wanted to say, and a lot of the remarks that he gave were just, I think, him speaking off the cuff and from the heart.
The real election night in Nashville, Tennessee in 2000, Gore sort of came up to me and said, do you have a speech ready? And I said, yes. And I sort of brought it to him on another floor of the Lowe's Hotel. He took a quick glance at it, and then it was loaded onto a teleprompter at the War Memorial. He never gave that speech. I kept a kind of an evolving draft. Whenever I had a few hours free, I would look at the existing concession speech I had and dust it off and change a few things. The Supreme Court ruled, whatever day that was, 36 days after, the actual election day. And I did show up at his house that morning with a draft.
We came back to her very early in the morning, 5, 6 a.m., and sat down with her again. And she said, I want to speak directly to the women and girls who invested so much in my candidacy and in the future of what this could have meant, and who might be particularly in need of hope and reassurance right now. And that's where the line in her speech came from.
And to all the little girls who are watching this, never doubt that you are valuable and powerful and deserving of every chance and opportunity in the world.
He wanted to recognize the cultural and historical significance of Obama's win. He wanted to be very upfront about it. Several times he referred to him as my president.
I wish Godspeed to the man who was my former opponent and will be my president.
He's my president. He's your president. He's all our president. That was very, very deliberate, and that was McCain. That was McCain telling me to write it that way.
People will tune in and they want to hear what you have to say, and they want to know that the country's going to be okay.
Whatever words you collaborate on for your candidate, your defeated candidate, put the country's interest ahead of any of your personal feelings.
Make your concession a Valentine to the process. Make it a love letter to democracy. Don't make it about your campaign. Don't pat yourself on the back.
This is your last opportunity to really say to your supporters, hey, you know what? This didn't go our way, but this is not just the president of the other party. This is the president of the entire country. And you want to throw your support behind them and wish them well.
And joining me now is Peggy Noonan, columnist for the Wall Street Journal and a former speechwriter for President Ronald Reagan, and now, of course, an NBC News political analyst, and also former speechwriter Mike Barnicle. You may see him on quite a few mornings on your television. But before Mike became a columnist, before he became an analyst, he also was a speechwriter. Mike and Peggy, I could think of no two people I wanted to have this conversation with, the two of you, and you both said yes, so thank you for that. Peggy, let me start with you. A love letter to democracy. I thought, boy, that is, what it also says to me is that these concession speeches can be real character MRIs for people sometimes after the fact.
Yeah, I think that's true. I got to tell you, I was not able to see the picture, was only hearing the audio, and the sheer eloquence of everybody who has been on in the past 10 or 15 minutes has been fabulous. The speechwriters, Michael Beschloss. So it was really just lovely to listen to. Concession speeches ought to be a love letter to democracy. You know, a concession marks the fact, it underlines the fact that somebody won and somebody lost, and a contest is over because the people made a ruling. Here the people rule. So just making that concession speech is a way of bowing in a lovely way, if you can, to democracy and to democratic principles. I also think concession speeches are really compelling because it's the one time during a concession speech that you know a political figure is telling you the truth. It's the one time in the whole campaign he's saying, man, I lost. Man, it hurts. Man, we continue. Yeah. So I think there's something really fabulous about them.
And Mike, I guess this is what's making this current period that we're in, where we may not get one from Donald Trump. We may never get one. There is a sense of closure that a concession speech gives, frankly, to the whole country, not just to the candidate giving it or their supporters.
Oh, for sure, Chuck. You know, the amazing thing, like Peggy, I could not see the images, but I could hear the voices. And as I listened to them, I thought to myself, this was us. This was the United States of America. This is who we used to be. People speaking to loss with dignity, class, and closure. And it was magnificent. Two of them that we saw in the clips were sitting presidents of the United States, Jimmy Carter and George Herbert Walker Bush. And they exited the office of the presidency with great class and great dignity. And I think maybe this would be up to you as a public service to show that clip over and over and over, to reschool people or try to reschool people in what it means to be an American president and giving the gift of democracy to someone who has just beaten you. And in my own warped mind, I always resort somehow, eventually, to some sports metaphor. And I was thinking as I was listening to the former presidents and all the former candidates about the United States Olympic hockey team beating the Russians in 1980 in Lake Placid. And after the final bell rang of that game, do you believe in miracles? As Al Michael said, both sides, the Russians and the Americans, stood in line shaking hands. If they can do that, if the men and women we just saw in those clips can do what they did, my God, let's get going.
Peggy, how damaging is it going to be for us not to get a concession speech out of the president?
Oh, I'm not sure. I beg your pardon. I'm not sure it will be damaging at all. I think we have gotten used to a certain lack of graciousness, a lack of delicacy, or a lack of refined sensibility about democratic norms over the past few years. I suspect that will continue. I think it is what it is, and I have great hopes that in the future, these gracious norms will be reestablished because, as everybody has just said, it matters. It just matters.
You know, Mike, there is a way for the concession speech to be a launching pad to a political movement if you choose to use it that way. And this is the part where it seems like this president is so short-sighted about this, he doesn't see that either.
No, he clearly doesn't see that, but it's not in his nature to give that kind of a concession speech that would calm the country down. I mean, it's all about, as we know, it's all about Donald Trump. So I don't know that giving a concession speech from him or hearing one from him would make any difference at all. Peggy has alluded to this several times in her fabulous Wall Street Journal piece each week. And it is part of Trump's magic is a lot of people, too many people, I think, like Donald Trump because they like the way he talks, because to them, he talks like they would like to talk to their employer or whoever is aggravating them at the time. And I think the tone of any, in quotes, concession speech that he would give would be largely unproductive.
And I guess, Peggy, that brings me to a question. Well, I was just going to say, this brings me to a question I asked Michael Beschloss. Are we too polarized for the concession speech to work anymore, that in some ways there's more incentive to keep the fight, whatever that means in your, quote, concession?
No, I don't think we're too polarized. I think concession speeches as a matter of reality and graciousness are always helpful. Maybe slightly less helpful in the past, but it's always a good thing. You know, recognizing reality is always a good thing. Being gracious about it is really a great thing. Can I mention something that is part of my favorite concession speech ever that signals exactly what you're speaking of, which means signals something that's signals that you're not over. Ronald Reagan, 1976, Republican National Convention, lost in his close bid to unseat Jerry Ford. His people, Reagan's people, were heartbroken. They were devastated, especially the young conservatives who had come up to back him. Right. Anyway, he gave a speech, I think the next morning, that said, it quoted an old ballad. He said, "A little I'm hurt, and yet not slain. I will lie me down and bleed a while, and then rise up and fight again." And that was Ronald Reagan saying, I just lost in 76. I'll see you in 80.
There you go. There's the gracious way of doing it. Peggy Noonan, Mike Barnicle, thank you both. Really appreciate both of you sharing your expertise here. Up ahead, why I'm obsessed with the agony of the tweet. Finally, I'm obsessed with a number, but not the one everyone's been thinking about lately.
Propelling Biden past 270.
270. Joe Biden going above 270 electoral votes.
I mean, really, 270 is so early November. No, the number I'm thinking of is 280. That, of course, is the maximum number of characters in a tweet. And I bet you can figure out why.
President Trump tweeted.
I tweeted out.
President Trump tweeted out.
Via tweet. I put out a simple tweet. We're #1 on Twitter. Tweeted.
Honestly, it's practically impossible to think of Twitter and not think of President Trump, and vice versa. It all started long ago, way back in 2009. Oh, those were the heady days, huh? It was a match made in #heaven. A true symbiotic relationship. But in time, the romance began to unravel. The Trump Twitter page started to become a cruel and shallow monotony trench. A long plastic hallway where untruths and half-truths ran free. and both men and women were smeared as dogs, where he claimed unsubstantiated successes, made unfounded accusations about his opponents, denied the spread of COVID-19 and the efficacy of masks, lambasted and maligned U.S. allies regularly, shared doctored viral videos and images, called journalists enemies of the people, and behaved in myriad other ways that were, well, unprecedented. Twitter put up with it for a while, a long while, until suddenly, very recently, it didn't. Slapping disclaimer after disclaimer on his erroneous tweets about non-existent election fraud. The romance clearly was over, but you knew it had to be this way, right? Sure, President Trump is still on Twitter, but the love is gone. And now it's all just another case of the he said, he said, he said, he said, he said variety. So here we are, some 55,000 Trump tweets later, and no question he's leveraged it into a powerful political weapon and engaged tens of millions of supporters. But what have we learned about our president, our White House, and maybe even ourselves throughout all of these tweets? Well, we learned the administration once considered his tweets official presidential statements until they suddenly decided they weren't anymore. We learned of new words into our political lexicon like covfefe and hamburger. And we've learned that in the instant gratification world of social media, truth and understanding and context can be hard to find, especially 200 characters at a time. #sad. That's all for Meet the Press Reports. Thanks for being with us. I'll see you Sunday on Meet the Press. Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.